Dive into a chilling collection of short terrifying stories that will haunt your mind and keep you up at night. Are you brave enough to listen?
The Forgotten Floor. Part 1, The Unsettling Beginnings. Lena Williams sat at her desk, the faint hum of her computer the only sound in the otherwise silent office. It was her first week at Synthex Technologies, a cutting-edge company known for revolutionizing the world with artificial intelligence. The building itself, sleek, modern, and disturbingly sterile, felt more like a high-tech laboratory than a workplace. Glass walls, open floor plans, and an oppressive sense of order made the place feel detached, as if the human element had been entirely removed from it. She adjusted her headset, glanced at her calendar, and sighed. Another late night. The clock on the wall read 9:45 p.m. Most of the employees had long since gone home, leaving her alone on the floor. The soft glow of the lights above flickered slightly, nothing unusual for this building. The building had a tendency to do that, as if it had its own rhythm, its own pulse. Maybe it's the building settling, she muttered to herself. But deep down, Lena felt like it was something more. She'd only been with the company for a week, but there was already something off about the place. No one ever talked about the building's history, and the few times she had asked about it, she was met with nervous glances or awkward silences. The tech was world-class, and her colleagues were brilliant, but the building itself, it felt wrong. A sudden shiver ran down her spine. She rubbed her arms, trying to ignore the growing unease. Just as she started to type an email, the office phone rang. She stared at it for a moment. No one should be calling at this hour. Reluctantly, she picked up the receiver. "Hello, Synthex Technologies, Lena Williams speaking." There was a long pause on the other end, followed by a soft, garbled voice. "Help me." Lena's breath caught in her throat. The voice sounded faint, almost like it was coming through a tunnel, distorted and static-ridden. She leaned in closer, her heart racing. "Who is this?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Can you hear me?" But the only response was a low, guttural sound, followed by an abrupt click. The call dropped. Her hands were shaking as she placed the receiver back into its cradle. That was strange. The voice had been so faint, so far away. She glanced at the caller ID. The number was blocked. Confused, she opened her email to try to focus on her work again. But as soon as her inbox loaded, she noticed something, an email that wasn't there before. It was titled, simply, "Help." Lena frowned. She hadn't received any new emails for hours. The timestamp on this one showed it had been sent less than 5 minutes ago. She clicked it open. The body of the email was a single, corrupted file. There was no sender listed. She hesitated for a moment before clicking on the attachment. The file was labeled, "Error." When she opened it, her screen flickered. It was as though the file itself was glitching, distorting into strange, erratic patterns. Then, for a split second, a series of symbols appeared, symbols she didn't recognize, almost like ancient writing or alien characters. Lena's fingers hovered over the mouse, unsure whether to close the file or investigate further. Her eyes darted to the clock. It was already 10:10 p.m. Suddenly, the screen froze, and a single word appeared on her monitor in bright, red text, "Help." Lena's pulse quickened. She clicked to delete the file, but it didn't go away. The file reappeared, as though mocking her. She tried to exit the application, but the computer didn't respond. A faint buzzing filled the room. "What's happening?" Lena whispered to herself, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Then, the lights above flickered again, longer this time. The hum of the air conditioning died down. For a moment, the office felt too still, too silent. A cold draft swept across her skin, despite the fact that the air conditioning had just been checked that morning. Her breath hitched as she felt a sudden, intense pressure in the room, like something was watching her, waiting. Without thinking, she grabbed her phone and dialed her colleague, Mark Thornton. He was one of the few employees who still worked this late, and despite his quiet, reserved nature, he always seemed to have a strange way of knowing what was going on in the building. "Come on, pick up," she muttered. The phone rang for what felt like forever. Then, finally, it clicked. "Lena?" Mark's voice was low, almost like he was whispering. "What's wrong?" "I don't know. I just received this weird email, and the file won't delete. The screen's glitching, and the lights keep flickering. Something feels off. Is there something I'm missing here?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Lena could hear faint breathing, and then Mark spoke, his voice tense. "You shouldn't be working this late. The building, there are things here. You haven't noticed, have you? The cold spots, the glitches in the system, the whispers on the wind? It's all connected." "What are you talking about?" Lena's voice trembled, confusion and fear creeping into her words. "The building. It's not what you think it is. I shouldn't be telling you this, but I can't keep it to myself anymore. You've awakened something." Before she could ask what he meant, the line went dead. Lena stared at the phone in her hand, her mind racing. Something wasn't right. What did Mark mean? Suddenly, the lights flickered once again, and then went out completely. She froze, her heart thudding in her chest. The office was plunged into darkness. She could hear the faint whirring of the air vents, but everything else was eerily still. Then came the whisper, a voice, low and unintelligible, coming from the corner of the room. It was so faint, Lena almost thought she imagined it. But then, the words became clearer. "Lena." Her breath came in quick gasps. The office was empty. But she could feel it. Something was there, watching, waiting. Her phone buzzed again in her hand. The screen lit up with a new message, this time from an unknown number. It was another file, corrupted, distorted, the same help subject line. She clicked the file open, and as the screen began to glitch again, a shadow passed by her desk. She wasn't alone. Part 2, Uncovering the Past. Lena's hands trembled as she tried to compose herself in the darkened office. The faint buzzing sound of her computer was the only indication that the building's systems hadn't completely malfunctioned. The office was cold now, uncomfortably so, and the air felt thick, like something was pressing against her chest. She closed the file on her screen, but the image of the strange, corrupted symbols stayed burned in her mind. That thing, that figure she had seen in her peripheral vision, it was real. She had no doubt now. This was no coincidence. Something was happening, something tied to the building itself. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. Mark's name appeared on the screen. "Mark?" She answered quickly, her voice betraying her fear. There was a long silence before Mark responded, his voice trembling. "You need to leave, Lena. Now." Lena's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? I can't just leave. Something's happening, Mark. I need answers. You said." "Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to," he interrupted, his voice low and urgent. "The building. It's not just the AI. It's haunted, no, cursed. I shouldn't be telling you this, but I've seen it too. It's all connected. The entity, the disappearances, the glitches. It's awake again. Mark, please," she said, her voice trembling with panic. "Tell me what you know. What happened here?" Another long silence stretched between them, the hum of the office's broken lights the only sound. "Do you know why the building was built so perfectly? The glass walls, the sharp angles, the way everything aligned so precisely." Mark's voice grew quieter, almost as if he was afraid someone might overhear. It wasn't just for efficiency. They were trying to channel something. Lena felt a chill run down her spine. "Channel what?" "I don't know the full story," Mark continued, "but it's not just technology at play here. There's an ancient energy, something old, something that's been dormant for centuries. The building was designed to draw it in, to contain it." "Contain it?" Lena repeated, confused. "You mean, it's trapped here?" Mark's voice cracked. "It was. Until now. You opened the door, Lena. I didn't want to say anything, but I can't stay silent anymore. There's an old floor in this building, one that's locked away. No one talks about it. No one goes there. I don't even know if it's supposed to exist. But it's where it all began." Before Lena could respond, the call cut off. The phone went silent, and she was left staring at the screen, heart racing. Mark had sounded desperate, more frightened than she had ever heard him before. A sudden sound from the hallway caught her attention, footsteps, slow and deliberate. Someone was coming. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She turned to look, but the hallway outside her cubicle remained empty. She shook her head. It was just the building settling. The lights flickered again, casting harsh shadows against the walls. But this time, the shadows seemed to move. She blinked, but when she looked back, they were still. No, she thought. This isn't just my imagination. Lena grabbed her coat and decided to investigate the mysterious floor Mark had mentioned. She wasn't sure where to begin, but the idea of remaining in the office, trapped by this invisible presence, was far more terrifying than the thought of confronting whatever lurked in the building's hidden corners. The elevator seemed like the most logical choice. She walked toward the bank of elevators near the far end of the office floor. The light above the elevator was flickering, struggling to stay on, as if it too were wary of what awaited. As she pressed the button for the elevator, the door to the stairwell opened behind her. She turned quickly, her heart racing. Mark was standing there, his eyes wide with panic. "Don't go up there," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Lena froze. She had never seen him so terrified. "Mark," she said softly, "I need to understand. What is this place? What did they do here?" Mark stepped forward, his gaze darting nervously down the empty hall. "I'm the one who should have left when I had the chance, Lena. You don't understand what you're dealing with. They didn't just build a building. They created a doorway. A rift." Lena's mind was spinning, but before she could ask more questions, the elevator dinged, its doors sliding open with an almost unnatural smoothness. The elevator inside was empty. She could feel the tension in the air thickening. The doors weren't supposed to open this quickly, and the air smelled stale, old, like something hadn't been touched in years. Mark looked over his shoulder once more, then grabbed her arm. "You can't go up there. Trust me." But Lena had already stepped inside the elevator. "I have to. I can't just leave. I need to know what's going on." Mark hesitated, then stepped back. He looked at her, his face pale. "Then I guess it's too late for both of us." The doors closed with a soft whoosh, and the elevator began its ascent. It moved smoothly at first, but then, just as Mark had warned, the air grew thicker. The temperature dropped, and Lena felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. The elevator passed the 10th floor, then the 12th, and then, without warning, the elevator kept climbing. Her heart pounded in her chest. She pressed the emergency button, but nothing happened. The floor numbers stopped at the 13th, and the elevator continued to rise, as though it was on a never-ending loop. The lights flickered again, and this time, Lena's reflection in the glass wall beside her was wrong. The image staring back at her didn't move in sync with her. The eyes of her reflection were hollow, black, and as she looked closer, it began to smile. Lena gasped, her chest tightening in fear. She quickly turned away from the glass, but when she glanced back, the reflection was gone. The elevator doors slid open with a metallic screech, and Lena stepped out into a hallway that looked nothing like the rest of the building. It was dark, uncomfortably so, and the walls were covered in old, peeling wallpaper. The floor was made of cracked tiles that gave off a faint, musty odor. The air felt heavier here, as though it was suffocating. She took a step forward, her shoes clicking sharply against the tiles. There, at the far end of the hallway, was a door. Unlike the sleek, modern ones throughout the building, this door was old, wooden, with iron hinges that looked rusted and worn. She felt drawn to it, as if something beyond it was calling her. But as she approached, she heard a faint whisper. "Lena." It was faint at first, but then it grew louder, more distinct. "Lena, come closer." Her breath hitched in her throat. She felt her heart pounding in her chest, as if it was trying to break free. The whisper came again, this time from right behind her. Part 3, The Haunting Escalates. Lena's heart thudded in her chest as the whisper echoed in her ears, cold and sharp like a dagger. She spun around, but the hallway was still empty. The door behind her remained silent, and yet, the oppressive weight of the space seemed to push against her, closing in. Lena. The voice was unmistakable now, closer. Louder. She felt a chill crawl down her spine as the sound of soft footsteps crept up behind her. Something, or someone, was following her. The air grew thick with a musty, stale scent of decay, as if the hallway hadn't seen daylight in years. Every shadow seemed to stretch further than it should, and the temperature dropped, biting into her skin like an invisible force. Lena's hand trembled as she reached for the door, her eyes darting nervously around. She needed to get out. She had to get answers. The door groaned as she turned the handle. For a moment, she thought it was locked, but then the latch clicked open with an unsettling ease. The moment the door swung open, she was hit by a gust of cold air. The room inside was darker than the hallway, and the light from the hallway did little to illuminate the vast emptiness beyond. The space felt wrong. Her instincts screamed at her to turn back, but the compulsion to step inside was overwhelming. She forced herself across the threshold, her feet dragging as if the floor itself was trying to hold her back. The room stretched out before her like a forgotten relic. Old filing cabinets, dusty equipment, and long-abandoned desks lined the perimeter. The windows were covered by thick, yellowed blinds, and there was an unsettling sense of stillness in the air. Not even a hint of wind disturbed the silence. Her eyes scanned the room, and then, in the far corner, she saw something. A tall, black shape, standing motionless in the shadows. She blinked, her breath catching. For a moment, it looked like a person, a figure standing unnaturally still, as if waiting for something. Then the shadows shifted, and Lena's pulse spiked as she realized the figure was wrong. It didn't have a face. No body. It was simply there, existing in the darkness, like an absence of something human. The voice came again, this time louder, almost desperate. "Lena, don't." She stumbled backward, the sudden rush of fear making her head spin. She needed to leave, now. She turned on her heel, but before she could take another step, the door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang. The sound echoed in the room, vibrating through her chest. Lena whipped around to the door, but it remained shut, the handle immovable. She pulled at it, frantic, but it wouldn't budge. "Help me!" she screamed, her voice breaking. "Somebody, please!" Her desperate cries were swallowed by the room. The shadows around her began to twist, contorting into shapes that made her stomach churn. She felt a presence close, suffocating, pushing in from all sides. And then, silence. For a long moment, the world held its breath. Then came the sound of footsteps again, but this time, they weren't behind her. They were in front of her. Slowly, purposefully, they grew louder, until they stopped just inches from her. Lena froze, her skin crawling, every muscle tense with terror. She knew that whatever stood in front of her was not human. No one could move like this, no one could make the air feel so cold, so heavy. The figure in the shadows stepped forward. Her breath caught in her throat as the shadow began to shift, forming a face, her face. But it wasn't really hers. The face staring back at her was twisted, its features grotesque and warped. Eyes black as coal, lips stretched into a smile that was too wide, too unnatural. The reflection of her own image in the darkness. A smile that didn't reach the eyes. A face that seemed to be mocking her very existence. "You shouldn't have come here." Lena's legs gave out beneath her as she dropped to the floor, her breath ragged. Her mind raced. What was happening? Was this real? Was this her imagination spiraling into madness? But the figure didn't vanish. It stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate, and as it did, the room seemed to distort further. The air grew thicker, the temperature plummeting, until Lena could see her own breath rising in the freezing air. The room stretched out before her like a forgotten relic. Old filing cabinets, dusty equipment, and long-abandoned desks lined the perimeter. The windows were covered by thick, yellowed blinds, and there was an unsettling sense of stillness in the air. Not even a hint of wind disturbed the silence. Her eyes scanned the room, and then, in the far corner, she saw something. A tall, black shape, standing motionless in the shadows. She blinked, her breath catching. For a moment, it looked like a person, a figure standing unnaturally still, as if waiting for something. Then the shadows shifted, and Lena's pulse spiked as she realized the figure was wrong. It didn't have a face. No body. It was simply there, existing in the darkness, like an absence of something human. The voice came again, this time louder, almost desperate. "Lena, don't." She stumbled backward, the sudden rush of fear making her head spin. She needed to leave, now. She turned on her heel, but before she could take another step, the door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang. The sound echoed in the room, vibrating through her chest. Lena whipped around to the door, but it remained shut, the handle immovable. She pulled at it, frantic, but it wouldn't budge. "Help me!" she screamed, her voice breaking. "Somebody, please!" Her desperate cries were swallowed by the room. The shadows around her began to twist, contorting into shapes that made her stomach churn. She felt a presence close, suffocating, pushing in from all sides. And then, silence. For a long moment, the world held its breath. Then came the sound of footsteps again, but this time, they weren't behind her. They were in front of her. Slowly, purposefully, they grew louder, until they stopped just inches from her. Lena froze, her skin crawling, every muscle tense with terror. She knew that whatever stood in front of her was not human. No one could move like this, no one could make the air feel so cold, so heavy. The figure in the shadows stepped forward. Her breath caught in her throat as the shadow began to shift, forming a face, her face. But it wasn't really hers. The face staring back at her was twisted, its features grotesque and warped. Eyes black as coal, lips stretched into a smile that was too wide, too unnatural. The reflection of her own image in the darkness. A smile that didn't reach the eyes. A face that seemed to be mocking her very existence. "You shouldn't have come here." Lena's legs gave out beneath her as she dropped to the floor, her breath ragged. Her mind raced. What was happening? Was this real? Was this her imagination spiraling into madness? But the figure didn't vanish. It stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate, and as it did, the room seemed to distort further. The air grew thicker, the temperature plummeting, until Lena could see her own breath rising in the freezing air. The figure reached out, its hand stretching toward her, its fingers impossibly long, skeletal. "You shouldn't have come." Suddenly, everything went black. Lena didn't know how much time had passed, but when her vision cleared, she found herself lying on the floor of the abandoned room, gasping for breath. The figure was gone, the room empty. The shadows had returned to their natural form, the only sound the hum of the building's ventilation. Her heart pounded in her chest as she sat up slowly, the cold air still pressing down on her like a weight. She tried to get to her feet, but her legs were weak, unsteady beneath her. The door. She needed to get out. She staggered to her feet and rushed toward the door, throwing herself against it once more. This time, it opened easily, as though it had never been locked in the first place. She stepped out into the hallway, her mind racing. But the hallway looked different. The lighting was dimmer. The walls seemed to pulse, as if they were breathing, contracting and expanding with each passing second. The sounds of the office had changed, too, faint whispers in the walls, a low hum of electricity that felt alive. Lena's breath quickened. This wasn't the same building anymore. Something had shifted, something had changed. She turned to leave, but then a shadow appeared at the far end of the hallway. She froze. It was the figure again, the same faceless presence, standing just out of reach, motionless as if waiting for her. Without thinking, Lena ran. She ran as fast as she could, her footsteps echoing through the hallway as she turned the corner. She had to find someone, Mark, Sophia, anyone. But as she rounded the corner, the air thickened once more, and the whispering started again, louder, more insistent. "Lena." The walls seemed to pulse, closing in on her, tightening around her chest. Her legs were giving out. Her vision blurred. And then, from the corner of her eye, she saw the elevator doors. They were wide open. Part 4, Descent into Madness. Lena's heart pounded as she sprinted toward the elevator, her breath shallow, her body screaming for rest. Her legs were heavy, uncooperative, like she was running through wet cement. The whispers had intensified, a cacophony of voices pressing against her mind, tugging at her consciousness. "Lena! Lena! Come back!" they hissed, a rhythmic chant that seemed to resonate from the very walls of the building. She reached the elevator doors, and without thinking, stepped inside. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the doors slammed shut behind her with a deafening clang, trapping her inside the metal box. The air was thick. Her pulse raced as the elevator's faint hum filled the silence. She pressed the ground floor button repeatedly, but the elevator didn't move. The lights flickered overhead, casting long, unnatural shadows against the walls. She cursed under her breath and hit the emergency stop button, praying to get some sort of response. Nothing. The elevator didn't budge. Her hand shook as she reached for her phone, but the screen was dead. Not a single bar. She checked the time. It had only been a few minutes since she had entered the room with the strange figure, but the sense of time had become irrelevant. It felt like hours had passed. The building had swallowed her, and she was trapped in its maze. Then, the air grew colder, impossibly so. Her breath puffed in front of her face, like the elevator had been plunged into a freezer. Lena shivered and backed against the wall, her mind spiraling. Was this all some sort of nightmare? Had she finally snapped? A sudden movement caught her eye. She turned toward the corner of the elevator. For a brief second, she thought she saw her reflection, but the face staring back at her wasn't hers. It was contorted, twisted, eyes hollow and unblinking, staring back at her in grotesque silence. Lena gasped and spun around, but the reflection remained in the corner of her eye. Her real face, distorted in the elevator's glass walls, was smiling. "Let me out!" she screamed, pounding her fists against the elevator doors. "I want to leave. Please." But the only response was the low, guttural whisper, this time louder, vibrating through the walls of the elevator. "You cannot leave." Lena staggered back, clutching her head in her hands, trying to block out the sound, the whispers, the face, her face, smiling back at her. The elevator lurched forward with a sickening jolt. She was moving again. The floor numbers above her head began to flicker rapidly, like a strobe light, flashing between random digits. The elevator shot upward at an alarming speed. She looked around, feeling like the walls were closing in on her, the pressure building in her chest. There was no escape. She was trapped. The door dinged, and the elevator halted abruptly. The doors slid open, revealing an entirely different space. It wasn't the building she recognized. It wasn't even real. The walls were cracked and decayed, peeling with age. The air stank of mildew and rot, and the floor was littered with broken glass and debris. The whispering intensified. It was coming from the darkness beyond the elevator doors, the pitch-black corridor stretching endlessly ahead. Her heartbeat thudded painfully in her ears, but despite every warning instinct, despite the rational part of her mind screaming to turn back, she stepped out. She had no choice. The door closed behind her with a finality that made her stomach churn. There was no escape now. With trembling hands, Lena reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. The screen flickered, showing a single message. "You're not alone." Her blood ran cold. She turned, eyes darting to the flickering lights above. She wasn't alone. But who else was here? A figure emerged from the darkness ahead of her, walking slowly toward her. It was Mark. At first, Lena's relief was overwhelming, but then she saw his face. His eyes were wide open, but completely empty. No expression, no recognition, just the hollow gaze of someone who wasn't really there. His mouth was stretched into an unsettling smile, and his body moved stiffly, unnaturally, like a puppet being controlled by unseen hands. "Mark," Lena whispered, barely able to speak. "Mark, is that you?" He didn't respond. His feet dragged as he came closer, his movements jerky and unnatural. The whispering grew louder as he neared. "Come closer, Lena." "No. No, please," she stammered, her back pressing against the wall as she slowly backed away. "What happened to you? What's going on?" Mark's body lurched forward, his head snapping up with a grotesque twist of his neck. He was now standing directly in front of her, too close, his breath cold against her face. His mouth opened, but instead of words, a deep, echoing laugh reverberated through the hallway, a laugh that wasn't his. It sounded like something ancient. Something evil. "You shouldn't have come here," he rasped, his voice now a garbled, unnatural version of his own. "This place. It calls to you." Lena's legs gave way beneath her as her mind reeled, her thoughts scrambled in chaos. She was suffocating in the weight of everything. The building. The whispers. Mark. The twisted reflections. The thing in the darkness. Mark's eyes, no, those weren't his eyes anymore, glowed a sickly, yellow-green, and his hand reached toward her, his fingers too long, too sharp. She scrambled backward, gasping, and in her panic, her foot struck something. She turned, seeing a set of stairs descending deeper into the bowels of the building, into the blackness. It was the only option left. The only way forward. Without hesitation, Lena turned and ran, her legs shaking, her breath ragged. She could feel Mark, whatever it was that was wearing his body, behind her, its footsteps scraping against the floor, getting closer and closer. The stairs stretched on, seemingly endless. Her feet hit each step with frantic urgency. Down. She had to go down. She had to get away from whatever was hunting her, from whatever this building had become. She could hear Mark's voice, distorted, reverberating through the walls. "You can't escape, Lena. You're one of us now." The walls around her seemed to close in as she descended, the air thick with an unnatural pressure. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stop. And then, at the very bottom, when she thought she might collapse from exhaustion, she saw a door. It was old, decayed, covered in strange symbols and markings she didn't recognize. A deep, guttural voice whispered from behind it, as if the door itself was alive. "Let us in." Her hands reached for the handle, trembling, her mind spiraling into a haze of fear and confusion. She twisted it. The door creaked open. Part 5, The Truth Behind the Door. The door creaked open slowly, as though it had been waiting for her. Lena stood there for a long moment, staring into the darkness beyond, her hand still gripping the cold, rusty handle. Every instinct in her body screamed for her to turn back. But she couldn't. Not now. Not after everything she'd seen. The voices, the shadows, the twisted reflections, they were all pointing her toward this door. And so, with trembling hands and a racing heart, Lena stepped forward, crossing the threshold into the unknown. The air inside was thick with decay, the stench of mold and rot choking her. It was colder here, so much colder, like the temperature had dropped several degrees the moment she passed through. The faint glow of the hallway lights behind her flickered and dimmed, swallowed up by the oppressive darkness that now surrounded her. As her eyes adjusted to the low light, Lena saw what lay ahead, rows upon rows of old, broken furniture, filing cabinets, and stacks of crumbling papers. The walls were covered in faded, peeling wallpaper, the colors faded into nothingness. The space was vast, stretching out far beyond what she could see, as if it never truly ended. But there was something else in the room. Something alive. She could feel it. At the far end of the room stood a large, wooden chair, its back turned toward her. The chair was the only thing in the room that seemed out of place, standing alone in the center of the space. It was pristine, its wood unscathed by time, its cushion unsoiled. It looked almost new. And sitting in that chair was the last person Lena expected to see. It was Mark. But this wasn't the same Mark she had known. His face was pale, almost waxen, and his eyes, those hollow, black eyes, were fixed on her with an unblinking intensity. His body was perfectly still, and his mouth was set into a tight line, as though he was holding back something monstrous. "You shouldn't have come here, Lena," he said, his voice calm, but heavy with something else, something sinister. Lena's breath caught in her throat. "Mark. What is this? What's happening? What are you?" But before she could finish, the air around her shifted. The room seemed to pulse, the walls vibrating with an unseen force. And then the whispering began again, louder this time, an overwhelming chorus of voices, echoing off the walls, swirling around her like a storm. "You shouldn't have come. You are one of us now. The door is open. The voices grew louder and more frantic. The words were no longer whispers but a cacophony, drowning her in a sea of maddening sound. Lena stumbled backward, her head spinning. The world around her seemed to warp, to stretch and twist, like a painting being contorted by unseen hands. And then, as though the building itself was alive, something shifted within the darkness. The chair that Mark sat in began to move, slowly at first, creaking like something ancient and unwilling to awaken. And then, whatever was Mark, stood up, his movements jerky and unnatural, as though his limbs were being controlled by something else. Something darker. You've opened the door, Mark's voice rasped, now unrecognizable. It was deep, guttural, filled with malice. And now you will join us. Lena's stomach turned. Her knees buckled, but she fought to stay standing. She had to stay strong. She had to understand. What do you mean? What is this place? What is happening to you? The figure that was once Mark took a slow step forward, the shadows stretching unnaturally as if they were reaching out to claim him. This place. This building, Lena. It's a doorway. A gateway. It connects the world of the living with something far older. Something that should never have been disturbed. Lena's mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. The strange occurrences, the glitches in the AI, the distorted figures in the reflections. This wasn't just a haunted office. It was a ritual. The building was built on an ancient site, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. Whoever had designed this place had been trying to harness and contain this force, but they had failed. And now, the force was awake. You're part of it, now, Mark's voice rasped again, sending a chill down her spine. It's inside you. It's inside all of us. You've opened the door, and there's no going back. You're ours. Lena felt her pulse quicken, her body trembling. She could feel it now, the presence, the weight of something ancient and powerful pressing down on her. The building itself seemed to be closing in, suffocating her. No, she whispered, but even as she said the word, she felt it. The building, the dark force, it was all too much. The air grew colder still, and the room seemed to stretch endlessly, its walls now lined with faces, horrible, contorted faces, their eyes hollow and black, staring out from the wallpaper as if they were part of the structure itself. The voices, came again, louder now, rising into a shrill crescendo. Come join us. The figure that was once Mark reached for her, his hands now skeletal, his body impossibly long and thin. The darkness seemed to pour from him, like a liquid shadow, sliding along the floor toward her. Lena screamed, her mind slipping into terror, but then, just as his hand was about to touch her, something snapped. A pulse of light filled the room. It wasn't from the lights above, it was something else, something pure, something human. It was coming from her. Lena's eyes widened in disbelief as a warm, golden light erupted from her chest, enveloping her body. The force was overwhelming, almost blinding, and for a moment, she thought she was going to collapse under the pressure. No, it hissed. No. You can't. Lena's breath caught in her throat. The light surged, growing brighter and brighter, until the figure of Mark and the room around her began to warp and distort. The walls cracked, the floor splintered, and the shadows retreated like roaches scurrying from the light. The whispers faded, replaced by an almost deafening silence. And then, everything went still. The light faded, leaving only darkness. Lena blinked, her head spinning. She was lying on the floor, the cold concrete pressing against her skin. Her breath was shaky, but she was alive. The air didn't feel as oppressive, as heavy as it had before. The building was silent. She slowly pushed herself up, looking around. The room, the world, felt different. The shadows no longer held their shape, and the eerie, unnatural presence had faded. The hallway beyond was still, empty, like the building was finally at rest. She stood up, wiping the sweat from her brow, and took a shaky step forward. The door behind her, the door she had opened, was now just a plain, ordinary door. The handle was cold, and the whispers had finally gone silent. Lena didn't know what she had just experienced. But she knew one thing, she had escaped. Or had she?